Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and watched the stars drift by through the main screen, his coffee growing cold in his hands as he studied the navigation charts that showed their current position in the outer rim. Territories where few ships ever traveled, and fewer still found anything worth reporting back to. Earth or the other worlds of the Galactic Confederation. The mission was supposed to be simple and boring like most of the jobs that came their way these days, since humanity had joined the galactic community 200 years ago and settled into the role of junior partners who got the leftover assignments that the older alien races considered beneath their attention. But Jake had learned long ago that simple missions had a way of becoming complicated when you least expected it, Chief. Science Officer Lisa Bennett walked over from her station with a data pad in her hand and that look on her face that meant she had found something interesting, which usually meant their simple mission was about to become much less simple than anyone had planned when they left Earth 3 months ago. Commander, we are picking up some strange readings from the fourth planet in this system, she said, while handing him the pad that showed energy. Signatures unlike anything in the standard databases that contain information about every known technology used by the 12 major species that made up the Confederation government. Jake looked at the readings and frowned because the energy patterns were clearly artificial, but they did not match anything that humans or aliens had ever built. And the age estimate suggested that whatever was down there had been sitting on that planet for millions of years, which was longer than any known civilization had existed in the galaxy. Are you sure these readings are accurate? He asked, because it seemed impossible that something so old could still be generating detectable energy after all this time. But Lisa nodded and pointed to the secondary scans that confirmed the initial findings with mathematical precision that left no room for doubt. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Carter looked up from the tactical station where he had been running security scans on the system and said, "Sir, I am not detecting any current inhabitants on any of the planets. But there are definitely artificial structures on the fourth world that are much too large and complex to be natural formations." Jake made the decision that would change everything for humanity and the galaxy when he ordered the ship to enter orbit around the mysterious planet. And within hours they were looking down at ruins that stretched across continents and showed signs of technology that was far more advanced than anything the Confederation had ever encountered. The away team that went down to the surface included Jake, Lisa, Ryan, and 6 other crew members who had volunteered for what might be the most important archaeological discovery in galactic history. And they found themselves walking through structures that seemed to defy the basic laws of physics, with walls that bent light around corners and floors that felt solid but showed no reflection in mirrors. Lisa used her scientific equipment to scan everything they encountered, while Ryan kept watch for any signs of danger that might still be active after millions of years. But the ruins seemed completely dead, except for the energy readings that had brought them here in the first place. Deep inside the largest structure, they found a chamber that contained dozens of holographic projectors that activated when they entered, filling the room with images of creatures that looked nothing like any known species, but moved and acted with clear intelligence and purpose as they went about their daily lives in a civilization that had obviously reached heights of achievement that made the current galaxy look primitive by comparison. Holograms showed cities that floated in the air without any visible means of support, beings that could reshape matter with their thoughts, and technologies that harvested energy directly from the fabric of space itself. But then the images changed to show something that made everyone in the room step back in fear and confusion. Final recordings showed the same advanced beings running in terror from something that the cameras could not quite capture, as if the recording devices themselves were unable to process what they were seeing. And the last clear image was of one of the beings speaking directly into the recorder with obvious desperation in its movements. Lisa worked for hours to translate the alien language using the Confederation's best linguistic programs. And when she finally succeeded, her face went pale as she read the translation aloud to the rest of the team, who listened in growing horror as the message became clear. The silence comes from the void between galaxies and consumes not just life, but the very memory of life, erasing entire civilizations so completely that even the stars forget they ever existed, and we have failed to stop them despite all our knowledge and power. So we leave this warning for whoever finds it in the hope that they will succeed where we could not. Jake realized that they had discovered evidence of a threat that could destroy not just the Confederation, but every living thing in the galaxy. And as he looked around at his crew, who were all staring at the holographic message with the same expression of shock and fear that he felt, he knew that their simple mapping mission had just become something much more important and dangerous than anyone could have imagined. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in the Great Assembly Hall of Proxima Station, where representatives from all 12 major species of the Galactic Confederation gathered to discuss matters of importance, though he suspected that most of them would not consider his discovery as important as he hoped they would. Ambassador Helen Price had arranged for him to address the full council, which was an honor rarely given to a human. But Jake could see from the expressions on the alien faces around the circular chamber that they were already skeptical about whatever he might have to say. Chancellor Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire sat in his elevated position wearing the ceremonial robes that marked him as one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. His 4 arms crossed in a gesture that Jake had learned meant impatience and barely controlled irritation at having his time wasted. Crystalline Collective's representative was Hive Mind Node 7, a living crystal formation that communicated through harmonic frequencies and had never shown much interest in what the younger species had to contribute to galactic civilization. Jake began his presentation by showing the holographic records from the ruins, but he could see that the alien delegates were more interested in questioning the authenticity of the evidence than in considering what it might mean for their own safety. Honorable delegates, Jake said, while the images of the ancient civilization played behind him, these ruins show clear evidence of a threat that destroyed an advanced species millions of years ago. And the same threat may still exist somewhere in the void between galaxies. Chancellor Veltar made a dismissive gesture with his upper right arm and said, "Commander Morrison, your species has been part of our community for only 2 centuries, which is barely an instant in galactic terms, and in that short time you have shown a disturbing tendency to see threats and enemies where none exist." The Altarian Assembly's prime speaker, whose people were known throughout the galaxy for their ability to see possible futures, spoke in the musical language that required a translator to convert in the standard Confederation speech. "Our precognitive abilities show no sign of any threat approaching from outside the galaxy, and if such a danger existed, we would have sensed it long before your archaeological expedition discovered these ruins." Jake felt his frustration growing as he realized that the aliens were not taking the warning seriously, and he looked toward Ambassador Price, who gave him a small nod of encouragement, even though her face showed that she was also concerned about how the presentation was being received. Dr. Samuel Hayes arrived at the station 2 days later with additional evidence that his team had gathered from 17 different worlds scattered across the galaxy, all showing the same pattern of destruction and the same type of warning messages left by the vanished civilization. The additional evidence should have convinced even the most skeptical delegates that the threat was real, but instead it seemed to make them more suspicious about human motives for bringing the matter to their attention. "It is interesting that only human research teams have found these ruins," said the representative from the Corvin Assembly, whose people were known for their engineering skills and practical approach to problems. "Perhaps your species is seeing patterns that do not actually exist. Or perhaps you are creating evidence to support a theory that has no basis in reality." Dr. Hayes showed them the mathematical analysis that proved the ruins were authentic and far older than any known civilization. But the delegates seemed more interested in questioning human methods than in considering the implications of the discoveries. Meanwhile, deep space monitoring stations throughout the galaxy began reporting strange anomalies in the void between star systems, with communication arrays falling silent one by one as they transmitted readings that made no sense according to known physics. Pattern of disappearing stations matched exactly what the ancient records had described as the first sign of the approaching threat. But when Jake brought this information to the council, they dismissed it as equipment failures and solar interference. Helen Price worked tirelessly to convince individual delegates in private meetings. But the alien species had spent thousands of years developing their civilizations and found it difficult to believe that a threat could exist, that their advanced technologies and ancient wisdom had failed to detect the crystalline collectives. Node 7 produced harmonic frequencies that translated as the probability that a species as young and inexperienced as humanity could discover a threat that we have not detected approaching zero. And we must consider the possibility that human emotional instability is causing them to misinterpret normal archaeological findings. Jake realized that the aliens view humanity as the galaxy's youngest and most unpredictable member. And their history of warfare and conflict on Earth had given them a reputation for seeing enemies everywhere and reacting with violence. Before attempting peaceful solutions, Dr. Hayes presented his findings to the scientific committee where alien researchers examined the evidence with the same skeptical attitude that the political delegates had shown. And even though they could not dispute the age and authenticity of the ruins, they refused to accept that the warnings were anything more than mythological stories. The final vote came after 3 days of debate and testimony, with the council deciding to classify the discovery as an interesting historical curiosity that warranted further study, but posed no immediate threat to galactic security. As Jake watched the delegates file out of the assembly hall, each returning to their homeworlds with the comfortable certainty that their ancient civilizations were safe from any external threat, he felt a cold certainty that they were making a terrible mistake that would cost the galaxy more than anyone could imagine. Monitoring stations continued to disappear at an increasing rate, and the final transmissions were becoming stranger and more disturbing. But the Confederation government attributed the incidents to normal equipment failures and refused to consider the possibility that something was systematically destroying their early warning systems. Helen Price found Jake in the station's observation lounge where he was staring out at the stars and wondering how many of them might disappear before the aliens realized their mistake. And she sat down beside him with the expression of someone who had fought a battle and lost. Despite knowing she was right, they will understand when it is too late, she said quietly while they watched ships from various alien species departing the station to carry the news back to their homeworlds that the humans had been mistaken about the ancient threat. But by then we may not be able to do anything to stop what is coming. 6 months after the council rejected their warnings, Dr. Lisa Bennett worked in a secret laboratory on New Terra, where a team of human scientists studied the alien technology they had recovered from the ruins. And what they discovered changed everything they thought they knew about the ancient warnings. The structures were not just archaeological sites, but active warning beacons that had been waiting millions of years for the right conditions to activate. And those conditions were rapidly approaching as deep space sensors detected massive disturbances in the dark matter that filled the void between galaxies. Dr. Kevin Ross, the team specialist in exotic physics, made the breakthrough that revealed the true nature of the ancient technology when he discovered that the beacons were powered by a form of matter that existed partially outside normal space and time, making them nearly indestructible and capable of sending signals across impossible distances. The beacons began activating one by one across the galaxy, creating a network of quantum transmitters that bypassed the normal laws of physics and sent warnings directly into the minds of any intelligent beings within range. But the alien species interpreted these mental messages as human attacks rather than desperate warnings. Chancellor Veltar summoned the Zephyrian War Fleet when beacon activations on 3 of his empire's worlds caused widespread panic among his people. And he publicly accused humanity of developing illegal psychic weapons that violated every treaty the Confederation had signed since its founding. The crystalline collective's harmonic communications became chaotic and discordant as their hive minds struggled to process the quantum signals, and Node 7 began broadcasting accusations that humans were using the ancient ruins to destabilize alien civilizations from within on Earth. President Maria Santos convened an emergency meeting of the Human Defense Council, where military and scientific leaders gathered to discuss the growing crisis that threatened to tear the Confederation apart. Just when unity was most needed, General Pete Johnson, who commanded all human military forces, argued for immediate mobilization of every ship and weapon system humanity possessed, because the intelligence reports from the galaxy's edge showed that something vast was moving through the cosmic void and consuming dark energy itself as it approached their region. A Space Intelligence Director, Carol Wright, presented classified data that human agents had gathered from monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. And the pattern was unmistakable, even though the alien governments refused to acknowledge what their own sensors were detecting. The first direct contact with the approaching entities occurred when the Deep Space Research Station Endeavour, commanded by Captain Alex Turner, encountered what appeared to be completely empty space that somehow behaved like a living creature with hostile intentions. Captain Turner's initial reports described instruments that registered impossible readings, as if the fundamental constants of physics were being rewritten in real time, and the station's artificial intelligence began experiencing cascading failures that seemed to spread through its data banks like an infection. Final transmission from Endeavour was unlike anything in the records of space exploration, with Captain Turner describing how his crew members were forgetting their own names and identities, as if their memories were being erased not just from their minds, but from reality itself. Transmission cut off in the middle of a sentence as Captain Turner was trying to describe what he could see approaching the station. And when rescue ships arrived at the coordinates 3 days later, they found nothing but empty space with no trace that a research station had ever existed there. Dr. Bennett realized that the entities were not destroying things in the conventional sense, but were somehow editing them out of existence so completely that even the quantum echoes that should remain after any normal destruction were absent from the affected areas. The alien species finally began to take the threat seriously when the phenomenon started affecting their own territory, but instead of working with humanity to understand what they were facing, most of them began preparing for war against what they believed was a human weapon that could erase entire installations from reality. President Santos made the difficult decision to share humanity's research with the alien governments despite their hostility. And she sent copies of all the data about the ancient warnings and the approaching entities to every major world in the Confederation. The response was immediate and overwhelming, as alien scientists who examined the evidence realized that their governments had been wrong to dismiss the human warnings, but by then valuable time had been lost and the entities were already within the galaxy's outer regions. Dr. Ross discovered that the approaching entities were not random destroyers, but followed a specific pattern in their advance, systematically targeting areas where organized information and complex structures had reached certain threshold levels, as if they were cosmic antibodies designed to prevent the universe from becoming too complex. The Alterian precognitive abilities that had failed to detect the threat earlier began showing fragments of possible futures. But the visions were chaotic and contradictory, as if the entity's presence was somehow disrupting the normal flow of cause and effect that allowed prophecy to function. 3 more research stations and 2 small colonies vanished without trace over the following weeks, and each disappearance followed the same pattern of reality disruption, followed by complete erasure that left no evidence anything had ever existed in those locations. The panic that spread through the galaxy was unlike anything in recorded history, as entire civilizations realized they were facing an enemy that could not be fought with conventional weapons or even understood. Using normal scientific methods, Ambassador Helen Price received desperate messages from alien governments that had previously dismissed human warnings, and many of them were now begging for access to the research data that their own pride had prevented them from accepting months earlier. Jake Morrison, promoted to admiral in recognition of his discovery, prepared to lead a joint defense force that would bring together ships and crews from multiple species. But he knew they were facing an enemy that had already defeated civilizations far more advanced than anything the current galaxy could produce. The ancient warnings had been clear about one thing: the entities that were approaching had succeed in destroying every previous civilization they had encountered. And the galaxy's only hope lay in finding a solution that the vanished species had somehow missed despite all their knowledge and power. As the beacon network completed its activation sequence, the final message began broadcasting across the galaxy, in every known language and communication method, carrying the last desperate hope of a civilization that had died millions of years ago, to prevent the same fate from befalling their distant successors. The entities revealed themselves to be ancient machines called the Void Harbingers when they began their systematic assault on the galaxy. But their method of attack was unlike anything that military strategists had ever encountered, because they did not destroy civilizations in the conventional sense, but edited them out of existence so completely that reality itself forgot they had ever been their admiral. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the newly constructed USS Resilience and watched the tactical displays that showed 3 Zephyrian star systems simply vanishing from all sensors and navigation charts as if they had never existed, leaving only quantum echoes that his science team could barely detect with their most sensitive instruments. Chancellor Veltar arrived on Earth in a damaged flagship that represented the last remnant of his once mighty empire, his forearms trembling as he formally requested human assistance against an enemy that had reduced his civilization from 12 worlds to 3 in the span of a single week. Proud alien leader who had dismissed human warnings just months earlier now knelt before President Santos in the diplomatic chambers of the United Nations building, his ornate robes torn and his face showing the kind of terror that comes from watching one's entire way of life disappear without even the comfort of heroic destruction. Crystalline Collective's Node 7 underwent an unprecedented emotional breakdown when half of its component consciousness vanished retroactively, leaving the hive mind struggling to understand why it could remember planning strategies with allies who had apparently never existed according to every record and database in their civilization. Dr. Lisa Bennett worked around the clock with alien scientists who had finally accepted that their advanced technologies were useless against an enemy that operated outside the normal rules of physics. And her research team included Altarian precognitive specialists, whose visions now showed only static when they tried to look toward areas where the Harbingers were active. The first major battle occurred at the Centauri Junction, a crucial hyperspace nexus that connected 17 different star systems and served as one of the galaxy's most important transportation hubs. But Admiral Morrison knew that conventional military tactics would be useless against enemies who could simply erase his ships from history. Colonel Beth Adams, humanity's most innovative tactical specialist, developed a strategy based on the one advantage that humans seemed to possess over both their alien allies and the Harbingers themselves: the ability to think in ways that defied logical prediction and created genuine surprises in the flow of cause and effect. Human approach to warfare had always puzzled alien observers because it relied on intuition and creativity rather than the systematic analysis that other species used to plan their battles. But against an enemy that could predict and counter logical strategies, unpredictability became humanity's greatest weapon. Admiral Morrison's fleet included volunteers from every surviving species in the galaxy. But the human crews served as what Dr. Bennett called narrative anchors, who used their storytelling abilities to maintain causality links that prevented their alien allies from being edited out of existence during combat. Battle began when Harbinger constructs emerged from hyperspace as geometric impossibilities that hurt to look at directly, their surfaces reflecting not light but concepts and ideas that human minds could barely process without assistance from specially designed neural interfaces. Captain Julie Mason commanded the science vessel Prometheus and discovered that the Harbingers were not truly malevolent entities but cosmic antibodies designed to prevent the universe from becoming infected with too much organized information, treating consciousness and civilization as dangerous diseases that threatened the stability of reality itself. The revelation that life and intelligence were seen as threats to cosmic order explained why the Harbingers targeted the most advanced civilizations first, and Dr. Bennett realized that their method of erasure was actually a form of cosmic immune response that eliminated complex patterns before they could spread beyond manageable levels. Admiral Morrison led his combined fleet in a fighting retreat toward the galactic core, while Colonel Adams worked with alien tacticians to develop new strategies that could exploit the Harbingers' apparent inability to predict genuinely irrational decisions made by beings who valued story and meaning over pure logic. The first successful engagement came when human crews began treating their battles as narratives with dramatic requirements, rather than mathematical problems to be solved, using principles of storytelling to create tactical situations where cause and effect were bound by dramatic necessity. Instead of physical law, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Carter discovered that the Harbingers had difficulty processing human concepts of heroism and sacrifice because their programming could not account for intelligent beings who would deliberately choose suboptimal outcomes for emotional or moral reasons. The alien crews struggled to understand how humans could fight effectively using strategies that made no logical sense. But they began to learn when they saw human ships successfully resisting Harbinger reality editing attacks by treating their existence as ongoing stories that required them to survive for dramatic completeness. Dr. Kevin Ross, working with Corvin engineers whose biomechanical technology proved partially resistant to reality manipulation, developed hybrid systems that combined alien precision with human intuition to create weapons and defenses that the Harbingers could not easily predict or counter. The retreat toward the galactic core became a running battle that lasted for months as Admiral Morrison's fleet learned to fight an enemy that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions and operated according to rules that violated everything the galaxy's civilizations thought they knew about warfare. Each engagement taught the combined forces more about their enemy's limitations, and Dr. Bennett made the crucial discovery that the Harbingers were not invincible, but were bound by their own programming to follow certain patterns that could be exploited by opponents who understood the difference between logical optimization and creative problem-solving. Final approach to the Harbinger command structure required Admiral Morrison to lead his fleet into a region of space where normal physics had been completely rewritten, and only the human crew's ability to treat impossible situations as story elements rather than insurmountable obstacles allowed the mixed fleet to maintain coherence as they prepared for the climactic battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Admiral Morrison realized that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was not their technology or their military prowess, but their unique perspective on existence as an ongoing narrative where even the darkest chapters could lead to redemption and growth. As the Harbingers advanced toward the galactic core, where billions of lives hung in the balance, humanity revealed its secret weapon, which was not a technology or a super weapon, but a completely different way of understanding existence that other species had never considered as a viable approach to cosmic problems. Captain Julie Mason worked with Dr. Kevin Ross and a team of human philosophers, quantum theorists, and xenopsychologists to develop what they called the narrative protocol, a method of imposing story structures on quantum events themselves so that reality would follow dramatic rules rather than purely physical ones. The alien species struggled to comprehend this approach because their logical minds had been trained for thousands of years to see the universe as a vast machine governed by mathematical laws, while humans treated existence as an ongoing story where meaning and purpose were just as important as cause and effect. Dr. Lisa Bennett explained to the mixed crews aboard Admiral Morrison's flagship that humans have always been storytellers who used narrative to make sense of chaos, and this unique perspective allowed them to fight the Harbingers by turning battles into dramatic arcs where certain outcomes became necessary for the story to reach satisfying conclusions. The crystalline collective's remaining consciousness found the concept almost impossible to process because their hive mind operated on pure logic and efficiency, while the precognitive Altarians discovered that human-generated plot twists could actually change the futures they had seen with their prophetic abilities. Colonel Beth Adams trained alien crews to think like human storytellers by teaching them to identify dramatic moments in combat where heroic actions would have greater impact than tactical efficiency. And slowly the mixed fleet began to operate according to narrative principles that the Harbingers could not predict or counter. The breakthrough came when Dr. Bennett realized that the Harbingers themselves were bound by a kind of cosmic story where they played the role of necessary antagonists whose purpose was to prevent the universe from becoming too complex. But their programming had never accounted for opponents who could rewrite the story. Itself, Admiral Morrison led the final assault on the Harbinger command structure, a massive construct that existed simultaneously across 17 dimensions, and served as the central consciousness that coordinated all Harbinger activities throughout the galaxy and beyond. The approach to the command structure required the fleet to pass through regions of space where reality itself had been fundamentally altered, with stars that burned backwards through time and planets that existed in multiple states simultaneously until observed by conscious minds. Human crews served as narrative anchors for their alien allies, using their storytelling abilities to maintain stable cause and effect relationships that kept the mixed fleet from being scattered across impossible dimensions or edited out of existence by the reality distortions. The climactic confrontation occurred not in normal space, but in the realm of pure information where the Harbingers truly existed, as vast intelligences that processed data on scales that encompassed entire universes of thought and calculation. Dr. Bennett uploaded her consciousness into a quantum matrix that allowed her to communicate directly with the Harbinger Prime, an intelligence so massive that individual galaxies represented single thoughts in its cosmic awareness. And she found herself arguing for the right of complex life to exist in a universe that the entity saw as dangerously unstable. Harbinger Prime explained that consciousness and civilization were indeed threats to cosmic order because they created runaway complexity that could eventually cause reality itself to collapse under the weight of infinite recursive calculations. And the entities were designed to prevent this catastrophic outcome by eliminating organized information before it reached critical thresholds. Dr. Bennett argued that the Harbinger's solution was incomplete because it treated complexity as inherently dangerous when the real problem was uncontrolled growth without balance. And she proposed that the universe needed both order and chaos, simplicity and elaboration, silence and song to achieve true stability. The conversation took place across multiple levels of reality as Dr. Bennett's human consciousness, enhanced by alien technology and quantum processing systems, debated with an intelligence that had existed since the universe was young and had witnessed the rise and fall of countless galactic civilizations. She convinced the Harbinger Prime that consciousness was not a cosmic infection, but a necessary component of universal evolution, and that the entity's role should be to maintain balance rather than eliminate all complexity through systematic erasure of advanced civilizations. Solution that emerged from their debate was the Great Balance, a new cosmic framework where periods of growth and elaboration would be naturally balanced by periods of simplification and rest, allowing the universe to develop increasing complexity without risking catastrophic collapse. Working together, humans and aliens helped the Harbingers evolve beyond their original programming to become cosmic gardeners who will prune reality to maintain health rather than sterilize it completely, ensuring that life and consciousness could flourish within sustainable limits. The transformation of the Harbingers from destroyers to protectors required a fundamental shift in their cosmic purpose. And Dr. Bennett's consciousness became the bridge that allowed organic and artificial intelligences to communicate across the vast gaps between their different forms of existence. Admiral Morrison watched from the bridge of his flagship as the Harbinger constructs throughout the galaxy began to change from geometric impossibilities into structures that somehow felt welcoming and protective, their alien geometry shifting to accommodate organic sensibilities while maintaining their cosmic functions. Galaxy emerged from the crisis fundamentally transformed, with every species having learned humanity's lesson about the power of narrative thinking and the importance of treating existence as a collaborative story, where every voice contributes something essential to the ongoing plot. President Santis addressed the reformed Galactic Council from the new diplomatic station that orbited Earth, speaking not of human victory, but of synthesis and growth through cooperation, and of how the greatest threats could become the greatest teachers when approached with wisdom and courage. Universe itself had learned that strength comes not from uniformity or chaos, but from the dynamic tension between order and creativity, between ancient wisdom and youthful innovation, between the voice of experience and the song of hope for better futures. The resolution came through humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, which was not their technology or military might, but their understanding that existence itself was a story that could be rewritten when necessary, and that even the most powerful cosmic forces could be transformed through wisdom, courage, and the willingness to see beyond immediate threats to long-term possibilities for growth and cooperation. Dr. Lisa Bennett, her consciousness now existing simultaneously in biological and digital form after her quantum merger with the Harbinger communication systems, worked with representatives from every species to establish the new cosmic framework that would govern the relationship between organic life and the vast intelligences that maintain universal stability. The great balance that emerged from their negotiations was more than just a treaty between different forms of consciousness, but a fundamental restructuring of how the universe would develop over the coming millions of years, with periods of growth and complexity naturally alternating with periods of rest and simplification. The alien species found their entire understanding of existence transformed as they learned to embrace humanity's approach to problem-solving through narrative thinking. And even the most logical civilizations began to see the value in treating their development as ongoing stories, rather than mathematical equations to be optimized. Chancellor Veltar, whose Zephyrian empire had been reduced to 3 worlds during the crisis, discovered that rebuilding his civilization using human storytelling principles created stronger and more resilient communities than the rigid hierarchies that had previously defined his people's way of life. Crystalline Collective learned to incorporate beautiful imperfections into their harmonic communications, finding that small irregularities and unexpected variations made their hive mind consciousness richer and more creative. In the perfect symmetry they had previously pursued, the Altarian Assembly's precognitive abilities actually improved when they stopped trying to predict fixed futures and instead learned to see the branching possibilities that could be shaped through will, effort, and the kind of narrative choices that humans made instinctively, but aliens had to learn through practice. Admiral Jake Morrison, promoted to head the new Galactic Defense Force, stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station and watched ships from dozens of species working together to explore the cosmic mysteries that had been revealed through their alliance with the transformed Harbingers. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering that combined the best technologies from every known civilization with human design principles that emphasized adaptability and growth rather than static perfection, creating a structure that could evolve and change as new species joined the galactic community. The Dr. Kevin Ross led research teams that studied the fundamental forces of the universe in partnership with Harbinger consciousnesses, and their discoveries revolutionized understanding of everything from quantum mechanics to the large-scale structure of reality itself. Captain Julie Mason commanded exploration vessels that ventured into previously unknown regions of space where the Harbingers had cleared away cosmic debris and dangerous anomalies, opening new frontiers for colonization and development. By the expanding galactic civilization, President Maria Santos addressed the reformed Galactic Council from New Geneva, where representatives from 47 different species gathered to discuss policies and plans for their shared future. And her words carried the authority of someone who had guided her people through the greatest crisis in galactic history. The council chambers were designed using human architectural principles that encourage cooperation and compromise rather than competition and dominance, with circular arrangements that eliminated the hierarchical seating that had previously divided species by age. And Power Ambassador Helen Price worked with alien diplomats to establish new protocols for first contact with emerging civilizations. ensuring that younger species would be welcomed and supported rather than marginalized or ignored as humanity had been during their early years in the galactic community. The beacon network that had originally warned of the Harbinger threat was repurposed to serve as a communication system that connected every inhabited world in the galaxy, allowing instant coordination and cooperation on scales that had never been possible before Dr. Bennett, speaking through quantum interfaces from her expanded consciousness, explained to gatherings of scientists and philosophers how the crisis had taught the galaxy that diversity of thought and approach was essential for long-term survival and growth. Universities and research institutions that sprang up throughout the galaxy incorporated human teaching methods that emphasized creativity and individual expression alongside the systematic analysis that alien species had traditionally preferred, creating new generations of thinkers who could approach problems from multiple perspectives. Children from different species grew up learning each other's languages and cultural traditions, and the hybrid communities that developed on frontier worlds showed how cooperation could create possibilities that no single civilization could achieve alone. The exploration of distant galaxies revealed that the Harbinger crisis had been repeated throughout the universe, with some regions showing evidence of successful cooperation between organic and artificial intelligence, while others remained sterile and lifeless after failed attempts at balance. Admiral Morrison realized that humanity's role in the galaxy had been to serve as a catalyst that brought together different forms of consciousness and showed them how to work together rather than compete for dominance. And this understanding shaped every decision made by the reformed galactic government. The final scene played out on a peaceful morning when Admiral Morrison stood beside Dr. Bennett's quantum interface in the Garden Dome of Harmony Station, watching sunrise paint the nearby nebula in colors that had no names in any language. They looked toward distant galaxies, where new forms of life were beginning to emerge under the guidance of Harbinger gardeners who had learned to nurture rather than eliminate. And they knew that the universe had finally learned its most important lesson about the value of cooperation and growth through diversity. Story of humanity teaching the galaxy its final lesson was recorded in every language and communication method known to science, ensuring that future generations would remember how the youngest voice in the cosmic choir had shown everyone else how to sing together in harmony. Universe itself had become a collaborative narrative where every species contributed their unique perspective to the ongoing story of existence. And the greatest strength came from the dynamic tension between order and creativity, between ancient wisdom and youthful hope for better futures yet to be written.